I want to share with you this little video on process mapping. And this is a process map I had done for a business I had a few years ago. And I want to walk you through it. It's a really simple process, just so you can understand and create this kind of thing for your own business. So what I did in this case is what I call the macro process. So this process looks at the whole business and what are the various different elements or different processes that happen within the business. And many businesses will look very, very similar to this. So it starts off with business development, which then comes to us receiving an introduction or an inquiry. Then we have a sales process, which brings us to a finance process. So that's where we will send proposals, etc. Then that comes to getting our client set up. And then we have an operations process, which actually produces the service for the client. Then that goes to reporting. So we need to report back to our client and to our finance, back to finance process again. And then back to finally more customer acquisition and retention, because what we're trying to do is turn that customer into a raving fan who will then bring us more clients. So we're going all the way from business development back around to kind of business development again, which goes straight up into the inquiry and back to the sales process. So that was the process for this particular business. It doesn't matter what the service was, right? Because that would just even confuse it to discuss what that is, because this will be quite similar for most people, even if you're selling a product. Now, if you look at, we've colored the boxes here in different colors, and there's a key at the bottom right, and where you'll see the different people that were on the team here, and each person has their own box. So the RP is me, so my boxes there are that kind of blue-green color, and so I was ultimately responsible for business development, for the finance process, for the setup, for the acquisition and retention, right? So these boxes and the colors in these boxes represent the person who is ultimately responsible for this. Then you'll see there's an admin box there, and there's no box, there's nobody or no box here which is the color of the admin box. And that was because when we did this, we wanted to hire an admin person, but we hadn't hired that person yet. So I was still ultimately responsible for all those areas. The next one then is operations. So the operations person was involved in the reporting and the operations boxes. So you can see those colors match there. And finally, a salesperson. So the salesperson was ultimately responsible. And again, it's this word ultimately responsible for the introduction or inquiry and the sales process. So I would have been involved in the introduction and the inquiry and the sales process, but I wasn't ultimately responsible for them. And that's why that's colored in the salesperson's color. So that's where we get the colors. Now there's a couple of more elements in each of the boxes that we want to discuss next. So the first one is, let's look at the MP1, MP2, MP3. MP1 stands for macro process 1, MP2 macro process 2, etc., all the way down to MP9. And that is because this is an overview map, process map, but behind this I have then a description of all the steps that are involved in each of the processes. So there's a business development process, and there's a whole list of the actions that need to be taken in there and how each of those is done, so that I could hand that over to somebody else if necessary. So that MP1 then refers to another document which is called MP1, in which we have that whole process outlined. MP2, again, there's another process for an introduction or inquiry. MP3, there's a whole other sales process then under MP3 that has all the different steps. So the next thing you'll see then is that those numbers 60, 10, 30, 10, 30 on the document. And these refer to the value in monetary terms of what these are worth to the company per hour. So business development is worth $60 an hour to the company. An introduction inquiry processing, that is worth $10 an hour. The sales process is worth $30 an hour. The finance process is worth $10 an hour, etc., etc. Right? These figures are a little bit out of date because this is old, but this will give you an idea. Why have we put those numbers on there? We've put them down there because they are the value of that particular process to the organization. And if I, as the business owner, was worth $100 per hour, and I'm working on a process that is worth, let's say in the finance process there, that's worth $10 an hour, then I'm squandering a resource in the business, because I am much better off spending my time working on business development that's $60 an hour. So what this does is it helps us identify the first processes that we should look to hire for. And so originally in this process, when I started this business, I was doing everything. So I was doing let's say the introduction or inquiry process at $10 an hour. So that was one of the first things that we moved off of my plate and brought somebody in to run that process instead. That person was paid less than I was, and so that makes sense to do that. So what we have then is a situation where bit by bit those boxes change color, so that the business owner starts to work on the areas of the business that are the highest and best value for his actual time. Now, what we did after this is we take each of those individual processes, like the business development process, or let's take the introduction or inquiry process as a better example. We want to hand that off to somebody else because it's a $10 an hour process. So what we do is we create another map, looks just like this one, for the introduction or inquiry process, with all the different steps that have to be taken in there. And when we have all those different steps taken, put together, mapped out, then we're in a position to hire somebody and pass that process on to them. And now they have a visual description like this of what has to be done in that process. They can see from this macro process map where their process fits into the whole system. And then also they've got that breakdown under that MP2 of all the different things that happen within that process. And so training becomes very easy. And even if they're sick or something like that needs to be handed on to somebody else for a day, then that becomes very easy as well. So that is how the really simple process mapping works. This one, as I said, being the macro process across the whole business, this is the first one you start with, and then you start to dig down into the business development process and the setup process and reporting, etc., etc. And so the key thing to remember here is looking at those rates per hour. And if you're the business owner and you operate at $60 an hour, $50 an hour, $100 an hour, or whatever it is, identify the processes that you could get somebody else to do for $20 an hour, for example. And they are the first processes that you should move off your plate and get somebody else to do.